Ryan Walker grabbed the white envelope from the counter, stared at it for exactly 3 seconds, then crumpled it in his fist. A wedding invitation. His best friend's wedding. And his CEO's name was printed right there on the guest list. He smoothed it back out, read it again. Same words. Same problem. That was the moment everything started unraveling long before Claire Monroe leaned close at that reception table and said the 6 words that would change everything between them. Stop looking at the bride. Look at me instead. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, subscribe. You're going to want to stay for this one. The morning Ryan Walker's life quietly began to fall apart. Started like every other morning with burned toast and a missing left shoe. Dad! Ethan's voice came from somewhere near the hallway closet. I can't find my Nikes. Check under your bed. I already checked under my bed. Check again. A dramatic groan, the kind only an 11-year-old could produce. Then the sound of something heavy being shoved across hardwood floor. Ryan stood at the kitchen counter staring at the toaster like it had personally offended him. The smoke had stopped. The damage was done. He scraped the black crust off 2 pieces of bread over the sink, pressed them together around a layer of peanut butter, and told himself it was fine. It was protein. Ethan would eat it, probably. He poured coffee into a travel mug, screwed on the lid, and turned around just in time to see his son emerge from the hallway wearing 1 Nike and 1 sock, holding the other shoe in the air like a trophy. Found it, Ethan announced. Great, eat your breakfast. What is this peanut butter toast? Ethan looked at the plate, then at Ryan. It's black. The edges are black, the middle's fine. Dad. Ethan. A standoff. Then Ethan sat down and ate it without another word, which Ryan counted as a victory. A small one, but he was collecting those wherever he could find them. He leaned against the counter and drank his coffee and watched his son chew with the focused seriousness of someone defusing a bomb. 11 years old. Dark hair that never laid flat, no matter what Ryan did to it. A gap between his 2 front teeth that the dentist said would close on its own. He looked so much like his mother sometimes that it still caught Ryan off guard, the angle of his jaw, the way he tilted his head to one side when he was thinking. Ryan had long since learned to look at those moments and hold them quietly without letting anything show on his face. That was the job. You held things quietly. You kept moving. Backpack, Ryan said. Ethan grabbed it from the chair. Ryan grabbed his own bag from by the front door, checked his watch, checked the weather on his phone, checked that the stove was off, even though he hadn't used the stove. He locked the door. He double-checked the lock. Old habit. They made it to the car with 4 minutes to spare. Ryan worked at Meridian Technologies, a mid-sized firm in downtown Chicago that specialized in enterprise software solutions, which meant in practical terms that Ryan spent a significant portion of his professional life explaining things to people who didn't want to understand them. He was a senior operations manager. He was good at his job. He kept his head down, delivered results, stayed out of drama, and went home at 6 o'clock every evening to pick up Ethan from the after-school program at St. Michael's. That was the arrangement. That was the whole architecture of his life, built piece by piece over the last 4 years since the divorce. Stable. Functional. A structure you could rely on. He drove Ethan to school, listened to half a conversation about something that had happened at lunch 2 days ago, involving a kid named Marcus, and a stolen granola bar, kissed him on the top of his untamable hair, and watched him disappear through the school's front doors. Then he sat in the parking lot for a moment longer than necessary, drinking the last of his coffee before merging back into traffic. He got to Meridian at 8:47. He found the envelope on his desk at 9:03. It had been placed there by his assistant Diane, who handled his mail with the quiet efficiency of someone who had been doing this for longer than Ryan had been alive, and had strong opinions about paper clips. The envelope was cream-colored, heavy stock. His name was written on the front in ink, actual handwriting, not a printed label. He noticed that before he noticed anything else. Someone had taken the time to write his name by hand. He picked it up, turned it over. Mr. Daniel Hartley and Ms. Sophie Brennan request the pleasure of your company. Ryan exhaled slowly through his nose. Danny Hartley. Of course. Danny Hartley, who Ryan had roomed with at Northwestern for 2 years, who had introduced him to half the people he'd spent his 20s with, who had been standing next to him at Ryan's own wedding, holding the rings with the focused terror of a man who was absolutely certain he was going to drop them. Danny, who he hadn't seen in almost 2 years because both of them were busy, and the city was large, and life had this way of spreading people out until you stopped noticing the distance. Danny was getting married. Ryan almost smiled. Almost. Then he kept reading. Saturday the 20th of April. The Grand Ballroom at the Palmer House, Hilton, Chicago. He set the invitation down on his desk and looked at the additional insert tucked inside the small printed card that listed the rehearsal dinner, the hotel room block, and the guest information. He ran his finger down the list of names on the formal seating arrangement card, included with the VIP table assignments. He read one name 3 times before he believed it. Claire Monroe, Table 4. He sat back in his chair. Claire Monroe was the CEO of Meridian Technologies. She had been CEO for the past 2.5 years, brought in from a firm in New York after the previous CEO had retired. Ryan had been with the company longer than Claire had, which sometimes felt strange, like being in a house you'd lived in for years, and suddenly having a new owner change the locks. Except she hadn't changed the locks. She'd walked in, learned every room, and made it quietly clear that she intended to stay. She was sharp. She was efficient. In 2 years, she had restructured 3 departments, renegotiated 2 major contracts, and turned a company that had been bleeding clients into one that was quietly, steadily growing. The staff respected her. Some of them were afraid of her. Ryan had spent the better part of his time at Meridian trying to be neither. Their professional relationship was civil. Precisely civil. They were in the same meetings. She reviewed his quarterly reports. She had told him once in a review that his operational instincts were among the strongest on the floor, and Ryan had said thank you and meant it, and then they had both moved on to the next agenda item, and that was the extent of it. He had never seen her outside of work. He had never particularly thought about it, until now. He read her name on the card again. Then he looked at the invitation. Then at the window at the gray Chicago morning pressing against the glass. How does Danny even know Claire Monroe? The question sat in his chest like a coin that had dropped somewhere and couldn't be found. Ryan turned his chair away from the window and pulled up his email. He had a project review at 10. He had 3 reports waiting for his signature. He had an afternoon call with a vendor in Dallas and a budget projection due to department heads by Friday. He placed the invitation in the left-hand drawer of his desk and closed it. He thought about it for the rest of the week. Not obsessively. Not in the way that disrupted work or kept him up at night. Ryan Walker was not by nature or by practice a man who let things disrupt his sleep. Sleep was one of the few things he protected with genuine ferocity, because sleep was the engine that ran everything else, and everything else ran Ethan's life, and Ethan's life was the whole point. But the invitation was there, quietly. The way a stone sits at the bottom of a shoe small enough that you can walk, but present enough that you don't forget it. He finally called Danny on Thursday evening after Ethan was in bed, and the apartment had gone quiet, the way it always did, after 8:30. A particular kind of quiet that Ryan had never completely made peace with even after 4 years. Walker. Danny picked up on the second ring. Tell me you're coming. I got the invitation. That's not what I asked. Ryan moved to the couch, sat down, put his feet up on the coffee table and looked at the ceiling. It's a Saturday in April. I'll need to figure out Ethan. Your mom can watch him for a night. My mom is in Cincinnati. Then your neighbor, the retired teacher, Mrs. Paulson. Mrs. Paulson? Yes, she loves Ethan. Problem solved. Ryan, I'm getting married. You are going to be there. Ryan almost smiled again. He was doing that more often in the last few days, getting close to it without quite getting there. Congratulations, by the way. Sophie's good people. She is. A pause. She's too good for me, but she doesn't seem to know that yet, so we're moving forward. Smart strategy. Ryan. Danny's voice shifted, dropped slightly, became less performance, more person. I haven't seen you in almost 2 years. Do you realize that 2 years? That's not normal. We used to see each other every month. I know. Is everything okay? Like actually okay? Ryan considered this. Considered what the honest answer was versus what the functional answer was. Yeah, he said. Everything's fine. It's just the routine. It keeps you on track, you know. Once you mess with the routine. One night, one Saturday night, the routine survives. Danny. Ryan. Another pause. Different this time. Okay, Ryan said. I'll come. Yeah. Yeah. Good. Danny sounded genuinely relieved. Good. Okay. Table 4. You'll be sitting near some of Sophie's family and... He paused again in a way that sounded slightly too casual, slightly too rehearsed. And a few other people. It'll be a good table. Danny. What? Who else is at my table? I don't know what you're Daniel. A beat. Okay, listen. Sophie went to Northwestern too. Did I ever mention that? Different year, but she was in the same business program as Claire Monroe. You know Claire Monroe, right? Your CEO. The ceiling did not change. Ryan stared at it anyway. Yes, he said. I know who my CEO is. Right. Well, they stayed close, so Claire's coming. And I figured you'd both know people there, so it made sense to put you at the same table. And it's just dinner, Ryan. It's just... Danny. It's just a table. It's a landmine is what it is. It's fine. People have dinner with their bosses all the time. Not at weddings. Sure they do, all the time. Listen, I have to go. Sophie needs me for something, but you're coming. You said you're coming. I said I'd come. I didn't say I was happy about the seating chart. Nobody is ever happy about seating charts. That's the universal truth of weddings. I'll see you on the 20th. Danny hung up before Ryan could rethink it. He told Mrs. Paulson about Ethan on Friday. She said of course she'd been waiting for him to ask her to babysit again. Ethan was her favorite visitor. Ryan said thank you. Ethan said he didn't need a babysitter because he was almost 12, and Ryan said almost 12 was not 12. And Ethan said it's basically the same thing, and Ryan said it absolutely is not. And eventually, they arrived at an agreement in which Mrs. Paulson would come over at 6, they'd order pizza, and nobody would call it babysitting. Saturday arrived the way Saturdays always did, faster than expected, and with something left undone. Ryan stood in front of his closet at 5 in the afternoon in his dress shirt and dress pants and looked at the 2 ties he owned. One was navy, one was burgundy. He stood there for a moment longer than was reasonable for a decision about fabric. The burgundy one, Ethan said from the doorway. Ryan looked at him. How long have you been standing there? Long enough. Ethan pushed himself off the doorframe and walked in, picked up the burgundy tie and held it up against his father's shirt with the serious expression of someone who had strong aesthetic opinions and wasn't afraid to use them. This one. It looks better. Since when do you know anything about ties? Since I looked it up. He said it simply, like it was obvious. Of course I looked it up. Ryan sometimes forgot that his son had the entire internet in his pocket, and a particular kind of curiosity that didn't leave questions unanswered for long. Ryan took the tie. Okay. Dad. Yeah. Ethan looked at him. Not the way kids usually looked at their parents, not with the casual, distracted glance that meant they were already thinking about something else. He looked the way he sometimes did when something was actually registering when he was filing it away. You look nervous, he said. Ryan kept his face even. I'm not nervous. Your jaw does that thing. My jaw doesn't do a thing. It does. It goes tight. Like, Ethan made a clenching expression that was probably meant to imitate Ryan and landed somewhere between accurate and embarrassing. Ryan looked at him for a moment. Then he put on the tie and turned to the mirror. I'm fine, he said. It's just a wedding. Ethan leaned against the dresser watching him. Mom used to say that weddings made people act weird. Ryan's hands paused on the tie. Just for a second. Then he kept moving, straightened the knot, smoothed the front, looked at himself in the mirror with the flat, practical gaze he used when he needed to deal with something, and feeling wasn't on the agenda. Your mom was usually right, he said. Ethan didn't say anything to that. Ryan turned around. Pizza at 7. Mrs. Paulson has the number for my cell, and the number for Danny's house, and the number for the venue, all in the notebook by the kitchen phone. You are in bed by 9:30. 9:30 is so early. 9:30. Dad? Ethan. Ethan looked at the ceiling with the expression of a man who had been wronged by the universe. Fine. Ryan picked up his jacket from the bed. He looked at his son. Hey. Ethan looked at him. I'll be back before midnight. A promise. The kind he kept without exception. You know that, right? Something shifted in Ethan's face. Not much. Just slightly. The way a light changes when a cloud moves off it. Yeah, he said. I know. Ryan put his hand briefly on the back of his son's head, quick, firm, the same gesture he'd been making since Ethan was small enough to carry. Good. He walked out, picked up his keys, closed the door behind him, stood in the hallway for exactly 3 seconds. Then he went to the elevator and rode it down to the lobby and walked out into the April night and told himself it was just a wedding, just dinner, just one night, and none of that would turn out to be true. But he didn't know it yet. The Palmer house was lit like something out of a different era. Ryan had been inside before years ago for a work event he barely remembered. But tonight it looked different. Gold light pouring out of every window. Cars lined up along Monroe Street, couples moving up the front steps in formal wear, the kind of scene that made you feel for just a moment like you'd wandered into someone else's life. He checked in at the front table, found his name on the guest list, and was directed to the ballroom on the second floor. The wedding ceremony had already concluded. He'd arrived late on purpose, which he wasn't proud of. But punctuality for personal events had never quite recovered after 4 years of punctuality for everything else. He figured the ceremony was the part that mattered to the couple, not the seating for cocktails portion where everyone stood around figuring out whether they were the kind of person who got a drink immediately or waited. He got a drink immediately. He took a glass of something amber from a passing tray, stood near the far edge of the cocktail space, and oriented himself. He found Danny almost immediately impossible to miss, since Danny looked exactly like he'd looked at 22, except happier, and wearing a tux, and raised his glass across the room. Danny saw him, pointed at him with an expression of exaggerated triumph, and then turned back to the person he was talking to. Ryan smiled. Actually smiled this time. It made it all the way. He looked around the room. Sophie's family on one side. He recognized a few faces from photos Danny had sent over the years. A cluster of Northwestern alumni he half remembered from their 20s. Some Meridian faces too. He realized 2 people from the marketing department, a woman from legal, whose name he couldn't recover. And then standing near the window, a glass of white wine in hand, speaking to an older couple with the calm, attentive expression of someone who was entirely comfortable in any room she entered. Claire Monroe. She wasn't in her office clothes. That was the first thing his brain registered, which was an obvious observation, and also somehow disorienting. At Meridian, she wore the uniform of someone who had made a deliberate choice about how to be perceived. Dark suits, clean lines, nothing that invited commentary. Tonight, she was in something different. A deep green dress that was elegant without trying to announce it. Her hair was down, which he had never seen. She wore it differently than he'd imagined, which was a sentence he immediately regretted forming in his own head because he had not been imagining it. She hadn't seen him yet. Ryan took a slow sip of his drink and made a minor internal recalibration. This was fine. This was manageable. Two adults. Same room. A social context with established rules. You were pleasant. You were brief. You moved on. He had navigated more complex professional situations than this. He had survived quarterly reviews with board members, contract renegotiations at midnight, a departmental restructuring where 3 people had cried in his office in the same week. He could handle seeing his CEO at a wedding. He turned to find someone else to talk to. Ryan Walker. Her voice. Behind him. Closer than he'd expected. He turned back around. Claire Monroe was looking at him with the same steady, unreadable expression she used in meetings when she was waiting for someone to get to the point. Except there was something slightly different about it tonight, a looseness around the edges, a quality he didn't have a word for yet. "Ms. Monroe," he said. Old reflex. Office reflex. The corner of her mouth moved. "We're not in the office," she said. "No," he adjusted. "Claire." She looked at him, not the quick evaluative look of a professional assessment, but something longer, slower. Like she was reading something he hadn't written yet. "I didn't know you and Danny were close," she said. "Northwestern. We roomed together sophomore year." Sophie never mentioned it. She probably didn't know. Danny and I have been bad at keeping in touch. He paused. "You and Sophie go back to school." "Business program." A small nod. "She was 2 years behind me. Brilliant. Much more patient than I ever was." Something in her voice when she said it, a warmth that Ryan had never heard in the building on Wacker Drive. "I was glad when she found someone." "Danny's good people," Ryan said. "Chaotic, but good." She almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. That sounds like the right balance. They stood there for a moment in the particular kind of silence that wasn't uncomfortable but wasn't comfortable either. The silence of 2 people who know each other in one context, standing suddenly in another, neither of them quite certain which rules applied. Ryan lifted his glass slightly, a reflex, a reason to look somewhere other than directly at her. "How's Ethan?" she asked. He looked back. "You know about Ethan." "You have a photo on your desk," she said simply. "A boy with—" She made a gesture near her own hair. "Hair that doesn't quite cooperate." Ryan laughed, actually laughed short and surprised. "Yeah, that's him. He's good. He's great, actually." A beat. "He told me to wear the burgundy tie." Claire's gaze dropped briefly to his tie, then returned to his face. "Good call," she said. "He has taste." Ryan had no answer for that, partly because it was a small, harmless compliment, and partly because Claire Monroe was looking at him the way you look at someone you've been wondering about, and he had not been prepared for that to be a thing that was happening. Someone across the room called her name. She glanced over her shoulder. "I'll see you at dinner," she said. She said it the way you say a fact, a thing that was simply true and would arrive in its own time. Ryan nodded. She walked away. He finished his drink standing exactly where he was, looking at nothing in particular, trying to figure out whether the room had gotten warmer or whether that was only him. It was probably only him. He went to find Danny. And dinner hadn't even started yet. Danny grabbed Ryan's arm the moment he spotted him moving through the crowd near the bar, pulling him sideways with the grip of a man who had been waiting for this exact moment and was not going to let it pass. "You came," Danny said. And the way he said it, not surprised but relieved, told Ryan more than he wanted to know about how much Danny had actually doubted he would show up. "I said I'd come. You say a lot of things." Danny pulled him into a hug that was too tight and too long for the setting, and Ryan let it happen because sometimes you just let the people who matter do what they need to do. When Danny finally pulled back, he was grinning the way he used to grin after a good exam, like the world had briefly decided to be generous. You look good. You look older, but good. You look like a man who hasn't slept in 3 days. Rehearsal dinner last night. Sophie's mother made a toast that lasted 40 minutes. 40 minutes, Ryan. I timed it. He lowered his voice. I love that woman, but 40 minutes. Is Sophie doing okay? She's perfect. She's been perfect all day. She's going to be a much better spouse than I deserve, and I've decided to just accept that and try to be useful. He glanced across the room. She's been asking about you, actually. Said she heard about you through Claire. Ryan kept his expression even. Through Claire? Sophie and Claire talk regularly, have for years. Danny shrugged the easy shrug of a man who didn't notice the specific weight of the information he was casually distributing. Claire apparently mentioned you, said you were one of the steadiest people on the floor. That's high praise, you know. Claire doesn't do sentiment. No, Ryan agreed. She doesn't. Danny looked at him sideways. You two already talked? Briefly. Cocktail hour. And nothing. It was brief. Danny had the expression of a man who wanted to say more and was for once in his life choosing not to. He clapped Ryan on the shoulder instead. Come on, I'll take you to your table before dinner starts. Sophie's going to want to say hi. Sophie Brennan was exactly as advertised, brilliant and more patient than anyone in her immediate vicinity. She had red hair and sharp green eyes, and the particular quality of someone who understood people quickly and chose carefully which ones to hold on to. She hugged Ryan like they'd met before, which they hadn't, but it didn't feel like performance. It felt like someone who genuinely believed that the people her husband loved were people worth knowing. He talks about you constantly, she told Ryan. Good things, I hope. Mostly, she smiled. He said you were the most responsible person he's ever met. I think he meant it as a compliment. He definitely meant it as a compliment, Danny confirmed. I chose to receive it as one, Ryan said. Sophie laughed, a real one, quick and bright. Then she looked at him with a slightly more measured expression, the kind that said she was about to say something she'd thought through. Claire mentioned you, she said. More than once, actually. Over the last year. A pause that was just long enough to be deliberate. She doesn't mention colleagues often. Ryan didn't say anything to that. Sophie didn't push it. She had the discipline of someone who made a point and then let it sit. She squeezed his arm, once told him she was glad he came, and turned back to greet another cluster of arriving guests. Ryan stood there for a moment, holding a fresh drink, turning that information over quietly. More than once. Over the last year. He filed it somewhere he wouldn't have to look at directly and went to find table 4. Table 4 was round and seated 8. When Ryan arrived, 4 of the chairs were already occupied. 2 of Sophie's cousins, a college friend of Danny's who Ryan vaguely remembered from a party in 2009, and a woman named Patricia who was apparently Sophie's former thesis advisor and had very strong opinions about the seating arrangements at academic conferences, which she was explaining to no one in particular. Ryan sat down. He looked at the empty chair to his left. The place card read, Claire Monroe. He looked at the empty chair to his right. That one read James Whitfield, which was a name he didn't recognize and felt relieved by. James Whitfield turned out to be a man in his mid-60s, recently retired from a career in architecture, who had known Sophie's father for 30 years and had the easy, unhurried manner of someone who had stopped trying to prove things to people and found it deeply liberating. Ryan liked him immediately. They fell into conversation without effort. Chicago architecture, the way the city had changed in the last decade, what it meant to build something that lasted. James had opinions, Ryan had questions. It was the comfortable rhythm of 2 strangers finding common ground, and it had been long enough since Ryan had done that with someone new that he noticed with mild surprise that he was actually enjoying it. He was in the middle of asking James about a renovation project in Lincoln Park when he heard the chair to his left move. Claire Monroe sat down. She did it without announcement, without the particular entrance some people make when they know they're being watched. She just arrived, placed her small bag on the table, thanked the waiter who appeared immediately to pour her water, and looked up. Her eyes found Ryan first, before she scanned the rest of the table, and Ryan wasn't sure if that was intention or proximity. "James," she said, leaning slightly past Ryan. "It's been too long." James lit up. "Claire, God, you look wonderful. Congratulations on the quarter. I read the piece in the Tribune." "Don't believe everything the Tribune says about me," she said. "They got 2 facts right and invented the rest." James laughed. "That's journalism for you." She turned to Ryan then. She didn't turn away from James abruptly. She finished the exchange gracefully, the way someone moves from one conversation to another without leaving a gap. But she turned, and when she did, she was closer than she'd been during cocktail hour. This was a table. This was 8 inches between them, not the generous buffer of a cocktail reception. "You found us," she said. "Table 4 is not hard to miss." He nodded at the place card in front of her. "Someone put some thought into this." "Sophie." No question in her voice, just a fact and a small knowing look that Ryan couldn't entirely decode. "She has a talent for placing people." The dinner service began. Salads arrived. Bread appeared. The table found its rhythm, multiple conversations running in parallel. The comfortable noise of people who were eating and drinking, and gradually deciding to like each other for one evening. Ryan ate. He listened. He talked to James and to one of Sophie's cousins, a teacher from Milwaukee, who asked good questions and seemed genuinely interested in the answers. But table 4 had 8 people, and a round shape, and round tables had a particular geometry. Whatever was happening to your left was never entirely outside your awareness. He was aware, for instance, of the moment Claire declined the wine the server offered and asked for sparkling water instead. He was aware of the way she listened to Patricia's monologue about academic conferences with the exact expression of someone who was being genuinely polite rather than simply enduring. He was aware that when Patricia finally paused to take a breath, Claire asked her a single precise question that redirected the entire conversation into something more interesting, and that this was the same thing she did in every meeting at Meridian: locate the useful core of what someone was saying and pull it forward. She did it instinctively. She probably didn't even notice she was doing it. Ryan noticed. About 40 minutes into dinner, in a brief gap between courses, Claire turned to him directly. Not the angled conversational turn she'd been using across the table, but a genuine square-on turn that meant she had something to say and was choosing to say it to him specifically. "Danny said you almost didn't come tonight," she said. Ryan looked at her. "Danny talks too much." "He talks the right amount. He's honest about the people he loves." She held her water glass in one hand, turning it slightly without lifting it. "Why did you almost not come?" It was a direct question. She asked them. Ryan already knew he'd sat across from her in enough meetings to understand that Claire Monroe did not traffic in the polite, circuitous questions that other people use to approach the thing they actually wanted to know. She asked the thing. He answered it honestly. "Disruption of routine," he said. "I have a system with Ethan. Anything that moves the parts around takes recalibration time. And that feels like a risk." "It feels like maintenance," he corrected. "There's a difference. Risk implies upside. Maintenance is just keeping things working." She studied him. The candlelight did something strange to the way she looked at him. Or maybe it was just that he'd never seen her in candlelight before, and the version of her that existed in fluorescent office lighting was only one version. "And you've been in maintenance mode for how long?" The question landed somewhere precise, and Ryan felt it the way you feel a key turn in a lock you forgot you'd locked. 4 years, he said. She didn't offer sympathy. She didn't make the soft sound that people made when they were trying to signal that they understood something painful. She just held his answer and looked at him steadily. "That's a long time to keep the lights on," she said quietly. Ryan looked at his water glass. "It is what it is." "It doesn't have to be." He looked up. Her expression hadn't changed much. It was still that even, composed expression she carried like armor. But there was something inside it tonight. Something that had been there since cocktail hour that he couldn't dismiss as the light or the occasion or his own projection. It was interest, real interest. The kind that didn't come from being polite. He didn't know what to do with that, so he said the practical thing, the deflecting thing, the thing that kept the structure intact. "You manage a company of 400 people," he said. "You understand why the structure matters." "I do," she said. "And I also know what happens when structure becomes the only thing." A beat. "You stop being a person, you become a function." Something tightened in his chest. He didn't let it show. "Is this a professional assessment?" He kept his voice light. "No. No hesitation. It isn't." The next course arrived. A waiter leaned between them to place the plates, and the moment broke not badly, not dramatically, just the natural interruption of logistics. Claire turned to James, who was asking something about the main course. Ryan picked up his fork. The table's multiple conversations resumed. But the thing she'd said stayed with him like a second presence at the table, sitting quietly in the chair between what he knew and what he wasn't sure he was ready to know. After dinner came the toasts. Danny's best man was a man named Greg, who had apparently known Danny since the 3rd grade and used this relationship as license to tell 3 stories that became progressively more incriminating. The table laughed. Claire laughed too, a real laugh. Ryan noted, not the polished social laugh she used in rooms where she was being watched. This one was unguarded, and it surprised him into looking at her longer than was probably advisable. Sophie's maid of honor made a toast that was funny and warm, and briefly made Sophie cry, in the good way, the way that made everyone at the table smile at nothing in particular. Even Ryan, who had built a fairly sophisticated emotional perimeter around events like this in the last 4 years, felt something loosen slightly at the edges. Danny's own toast to Sophie was short and completely honest. He stood up there in his tuxedo that didn't quite fit the way it was supposed to, because Danny had always been slightly built, and jackets had always slightly won the argument. And he said, "I spent most of my adult life convincing myself that being alone was a choice I was making on purpose." Sophie didn't argue with me about it. She just showed up and kept showing up. And one day I realized that showing up was the choice, that it had always been the choice. He paused. "And I'm going to spend the rest of my life showing up." Applause. Sophie was crying again. Danny sat down and immediately grabbed a bread roll like a man returning from battle. Ryan picked up his wine glass and drank without exactly tasting it. Showing up was the choice. He turned that over, looked at the grain of the tablecloth, put the glass down. To his left, Claire was quiet. He didn't look at her, but he could feel it, the particular quiet of someone who had heard something and was sitting with it. "He's a good man," she said finally, low enough that only Ryan could hear it. "He is," Ryan agreed. "You're lucky to have someone like that." Ryan looked at her then. Something in the way she said it, not wistful exactly, but with a particular quality of someone describing a thing they'd thought about. "You have people like that," he said. "I have colleagues," she said. "I have Sophie. A few others." A pause. "It's a short list." "That's not unique to you. Most people over 40 have a short list." "Is yours short?" He thought about it. Honestly. Danny, Mrs. Paulson in her way. A few friends from before who had drifted to the edges as the years had pulled everyone into their own orbits. His mother in Cincinnati, who called every Sunday and always asked the same 3 questions in the same order. "Yeah," he said. "Mine's short." She nodded. Like that confirmed something. The music had started somewhere behind them, a live band doing something slow and orchestrated for the first portion of the evening. The dance floor at the far end of the ballroom was filling up with the wedding party and immediate family. The particular ritual of the first few dances that signaled the transition from dinner to evening. Ryan watched Danny and Sophie move out to the floor. Danny was not a natural dancer, which Ryan could have told anyone who asked, but he was trying so genuinely and visibly that it didn't matter. Sophie was laughing at him. He was laughing at himself. They looked like people who had decided to be happy and were doing it on purpose. Ryan looked away. "You don't dance?" Claire asked. "Not at other people's weddings." "What does that mean?" He wasn't sure what it meant. He'd said it without planning to. "Just—" He turned his glass. "This is their night. I'm not really— I don't feel like I belong on that floor." She looked at him steadily. "Where do you feel like you belong?" He had no answer for that, which was itself an answer, and they both knew it, and the silence that followed was the kind that said more than talking would have. The band shifted slightly, something with a slower pull to its strings underneath the melody. More couples moved to the floor. The table was thinning out, people getting up to refill drinks, or find old friends, or give themselves over to the evening. James was talking to Patricia. Sophie's cousins had moved to the bar. It was just the two of them at table 4, and neither of them moved. Ryan was watching the dance floor, without watching it the way you look at something, when you're actually thinking about something else entirely, when Claire said quiet, without preamble, without any of the measured professional cadence she used in the building on Wacker Drive. "Ryan." He turned. She was looking at him, not with the composed, evaluative expression she'd carried all evening, but with something that had let the composure down, slightly, like a door opened just enough to let the light show through. "Stop looking at the bride," she said. He waited. Something in his chest went very still. "Look at me instead." The words hit the air between them and stayed there. Ryan heard them, the way you hear something that rearranges the furniture of a room, not loud, not dramatic, but irreversible. You can't unmove the furniture. You can't pretend the room is the way it was. He looked at her. Claire Monroe looked back at him. Neither of them said anything for a long moment. The music continued. The room continued. The evening continued to do all the things evenings do when they are oblivious to the specific internal shift that just occurred at table 4 of a wedding reception at the Palmer House on a Saturday in April. Ryan Walker sat very still and understood with a clarity that was both uncomfortable and undeniable that something had just changed, and that the question was no longer whether he felt it. The question was what in the world he was going to do about it. He didn't look away from her. "Claire, you don't have to say anything," she said. Her voice was even, steady, but her hand on the table was very slightly not relaxed. He noticed. He noticed because he had spent 4 years noticing details, cataloging small truths, reading the difference between what people showed and what was actually happening underneath. "I'm not asking you for anything. I know you're not. I just wanted you to—" She paused. "Be present. Tonight. For once." She said it in a way that made it unclear whether she was saying it to him or to herself. Ryan looked at her. He thought about Danny's toast showing up was the choice. He thought about Ethan at home eating pizza with Mrs. Paulson, already 10 years old, going on 40. He thought about 4 years of maintenance, 4 years of function over feeling 4 years of making sure everything worked at the cost of letting anything be uncertain. "I'm here," he said. It was the smallest thing he'd said all evening. It was also the most true. Claire looked at him one moment longer. Then she picked up her water glass and turned slightly toward the dance floor and said casually, like the moment had simply passed, and they were 2 professional adults at a table. "Sophie chose the band. They're very good." "They are," Ryan said. His hand was still on the table, not touching anything, just open. The band played something Ryan didn't know the name of, but recognized in the way you recognize a song that belongs to a different chapter of your life, something from before, something that had once meant a specific evening and a specific person, and now just meant before. He was still at table 4. Claire was still beside him. The moment between them had settled into something that was neither comfortable nor uncomfortable, more like the quiet. After a door opens when you're standing at the threshold, deciding whether to step through or step back. He hadn't stepped in either direction yet. He wasn't sure she had either. James had wandered off to the bar. Patricia had been collected by someone from Sophie's family. The table was theirs by default, and both of them seemed to understand without saying it that getting up would mean making a decision about that, and neither of them was quite ready. Ryan refilled his water glass from the carafe on the table. He did it slowly, with the deliberate focus of a man who needed something to do with his hands. "Tell me something," Claire said. "Not a demand, not an office directive, the kind of question that starts a real conversation." He looked at her. "What do you want to know?" "Something I don't already know from your performance reviews." She said it with a dry, precise edge that was almost humor. Almost. He thought for a moment. "I played guitar in college," he said. "Badly. But I played." She looked at him like she was recalibrating something. "What happened to it?" "Life happened to it. I sold the guitar when Ethan was born. We needed the money and it wasn't—" He paused. "It wasn't something I had time for anymore." "Do you regret that? The guitar or the timing?" "Either. Both." He considered it honestly. "No, not really. I chose something bigger than the guitar." He turned his glass on the tablecloth. "But I think about it sometimes. Not the guitar specifically. Just the version of me that had time to play badly at something and not care." Claire was quiet for a moment. "I sold my apartment in New York when I took the job here," she said. "I'd lived there for 11 years. I told myself it was practical. It was." A pause. "I still think about that apartment sometimes. Not because I want it back. Just because it was the last place that felt completely mine." Ryan looked at her. It was a small thing to say. It was also, he suspected, a large thing for her to say, the kind of admission that Claire Monroe didn't scatter freely. He'd been in enough rooms with her to know what her deliberate version sounded like, and this wasn't it. This was something that had come out sideways the way real things sometimes did when the context shifted enough. "Chicago doesn't feel like yours yet?" he asked. "Chicago feels like a project I'm running." She said it flatly, without self-pity. "That's not a complaint. I'm good at the project. But there's a difference between being good at a place and belonging to it." "There is," he agreed. She looked at him. "Do you belong here to Chicago?" "Ethan was born here," Ryan said. "So yeah. Whatever I feel about the city, he's the thing that roots me to it." He paused. "That's probably not a normal definition of belonging." "Maybe it's a better one." She said it quietly, almost to herself. The band transitioned into something lighter, the kind of tempo that drew people back onto the floor after a slower stretch, and the mood in the room shifted with it. Laughter got louder. Someone at the bar started a story that people were leaning in to hear. Danny appeared briefly in their line of sight, spinning Sophie in a way that was technically wrong and emotionally completely right, and Sophie was laughing hard enough that she had to stop dancing to breathe. Ryan watched them. He felt that thing again, the loosening at the edges, that the toast had started the slow, reluctant give of a perimeter he'd spent 4 years reinforcing. "Go dance with him," Claire said. He turned. "What, Danny?" She nodded toward the floor. "He keeps looking over here. He wants you out there." Ryan looked. Danny caught his eye at that exact moment and pointed at the floor with the imperious gesture of a man who had earned at least one demand tonight. Ryan shook his head. Danny pointed harder. Ryan looked back at Claire. "He's persistent." "He loves you," she said simply. "That tends to make people persistent." Something in the way she said it made Ryan stay very still for a second. He wasn't sure if she was talking about Danny anymore. He wasn't sure she was sure either. He pushed his chair back. "I'll be back," he said. "I'll be here," she said. She said it without any particular inflection, but it stayed with him as he crossed the room. The plainness of it, the way it landed like a weight, placed carefully, rather than dropped. Danny grabbed him by the shoulder the moment he reached the floor. "There he is. There is the man." "Don't make this weird, Danny." "It's already a wedding, everything is weird, just accept it." He pulled Ryan into the loose orbit of the small group dancing near the center. Sophie, two of her cousins, Greg, the best man, and a woman who turned out to be Greg's wife and was a significantly better dancer than everyone around her. "Sophie, look who finally left the table." Sophie beamed at him. "I was wondering when you'd come over." "I was comfortable," Ryan said. "You were hiding," Danny corrected. "There's a difference." He said it with the easy certainty of someone who had been watching Ryan Walker hide for the better part of 20 years and could identify the behavior at distance. Ryan didn't argue with it. He started moving, not dramatically, not like someone who was trying to dance, but like someone who had decided to stop resisting the momentum of the room. It was enough. Sophie looped her arm briefly through his and said something in his ear that he didn't catch fully over the music, but understood to mean, "I'm glad you're here," and he said, "Me too," and meant it more than he'd expected to. For 15 minutes, he was just a person at a wedding, not an operations manager, not a single father in maintenance mode, not the man from Table 4 who was sitting beside his CEO while things shifted without permission. Just a person moving to music surrounded by people who were happy in a room that smelled like flowers and warm cloth and somebody's good perfume. He caught himself looking toward Table 4 once. Claire was watching the dance floor. She wasn't performing it. She wasn't smiling for the room or doing the thing people do when they want to look a certain way. She was just watching. And when her eyes found his across the room, she didn't look away. Ryan looked away first. He danced for 3 more songs. Greg's wife taught him a step that he got wrong twice and correct on the 3rd try. Danny told a story that required dramatic arm movements and resulted in him nearly hitting a waiter. Sophie danced with her father, and Ryan stood at the edge of the floor and watched and felt the ache of it in a clean way. Not the grinding, complicated ache he'd carried for years, but something simpler and sadder, the kind that meant you were actually feeling it rather than filing it away. When the song ended, he thanked the group and made his way back. Claire looked up when he sat down. "How was it?" Danny almost assaulted a waiter. "That sounds about right." The edge of her mouth moved. "You looked..." She paused, choosing the word. "Different out there." "Different how?" "Less guarded." She held his gaze. "It suited you." Ryan sat with that. The room continued around them. Somewhere behind him a glass broke and someone cheered. The band played on. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Yes." "Why Meridian?" He looked at her. "You could have gone anywhere. After your last firm, the offers you must have had." He knew this not because she'd ever spoken of it, but because he'd been in the room when the board discussed what it took to get her to say yes. "Why a mid-sized tech company in Chicago?" She looked at him for a moment before answering, and he had the sense she was deciding how honest to be. "Because it was real," she said finally. "The other offers were bigger, shinier. They were the kind of jobs that look impressive from outside and feel hollow from inside." She turned her water glass. Meridian had actual problems, the kind that could be solved if someone paid attention and stopped taking shortcuts. A pause. "I like solving things that are actually broken. And now it's less broken." She said it with the particular restraint of someone who knew better than to celebrate early. "It'll take another 2 years before I'm satisfied." And then, she looked at him. "I don't usually get asked what comes after." "I'm asking." She was quiet for a moment. "I don't know," she said. It sounded like something she didn't say often, not the "I don't know" of deflection, but the real kind, the one that costs something. "I've been running toward the next thing for so long that I haven't stopped to figure out what I want when the running stops." A brief pause. "Does that sound familiar?" It sounded like a mirror is what it sounded like. Ryan picked up his water glass and drank and looked at the table and said very carefully, "Yeah, it does." The band slowed again. The floor shifted. The couples on it drew closer, that natural gravitational pull of a slow song, and the room went a shade more intimate, the kind of lighting and tempo that made everything feel slightly more confessional. Ryan was aware of how close they were sitting. He was aware of the particular quality of this specific silence, not the polished professional silence of a meeting, not the loaded silence of an argument or a negotiation, but the silence of two people who had said enough true things that the space between them was no longer neutral. "The thing you said earlier," he said, "about being a function instead of a person." He looked at his hands. "I think about that sometimes. Not in those words, but the feeling." He paused. "After the divorce, my ex-wife, she said I was present in the way a machine is present. I show up, I run the program, but there's no one actually home." He stopped. He hadn't planned to say that. It came out of the same place the guitar thing had come from, the loosened edge, the open door. Claire didn't fill the silence immediately. She sat with it, which was what you did with something that deserved to be sat with. Then she said, "Do you think she was right?" "I think she was describing a real thing," Ryan said. "Whether she was right about it being permanent." He shook his head. "I don't know. I've spent 4 years trying to make sure Ethan never feels what she was describing, trying to be actually home when I'm home." He looked up. "I don't always succeed." "But you try," Claire said. "Every day you try." Her voice was quiet. "That's not a machine." He looked at her. She was looking at him with an expression he couldn't name, not pity, not analysis, not the careful neutrality of someone managing a situation. Something more than that. Something that didn't have a category in his professional vocabulary. "Claire," he said. Her name, just her name. And what he meant by it was something between "thank you" and "what is this" and "I don't know what I'm doing right now." And she heard all of it, he could tell, because she inhaled slightly and looked at him steadily and didn't retreat behind the composure. "I know," she said, which answered none of it and all of it at once. The band was playing something slow and full and deliberate, the kind of song that existed specifically to make people stand up and hold on to something. Ryan heard it without meaning to make any decision about. It felt it move through him the way music sometimes did when his defenses were down. He looked at the dance floor. He looked at Claire. "I know you don't dance at other people's weddings," she said before he'd decided anything. Her voice was careful, even, but her eyes weren't. "I said that," he agreed. A pause. "Does that rule still apply?" It was the most direct thing she'd said all evening. And that was saying something, because Claire Monroe had been saying direct things all evening, and each one had landed with the precision of someone who knew exactly what she was putting into the room. Ryan stood up. He extended his hand, not dramatically, not with any particular performance, just the way you reach for something you've decided to stop pretending you don't want. Claire looked at his hand. Then she looked at him. Something moved across her face. Not surprise exactly, but the expression of someone who had prepared themselves for a possible outcome, and was now watching it arrive and finding that preparation had not fully accounted for how it would actually feel. She took his hand. They walked to the floor. The song was already a verse in. It didn't matter. They found the tempo without discussing it. Claire's hand in his hand at her back, the distance between them appropriate enough and closer than it was at the office, and both of those things simultaneously. She moved well, not like someone performing dancing, but like someone who was comfortable in her own body, which was, he thought, consistent with everything else about her. Neither of them spoke for the first full minute. Then she said near his ear, because the band was loud enough to require it, "You're better at this than you implied." "Low bar," he said. "Danny's out there somewhere." She made a sound that was almost a laugh. He felt it more than heard it, the small exhale, the shift of her shoulder. He was acutely, uncomfortably aware of every point of contact. Her hand. Her shoulder under his. The warmth of her, which was a human thing, a simple physical fact, and which he had absolutely no business noticing with the intensity that he was noticing it. He was her employee. That was a fact. He had a son. That was a larger fact. He had a life built on the architecture of careful decisions on the principle that certain things were not worth the risk, because the cost of getting it wrong was paid by an 11-year-old kid with untamable hair who had already lost one structural piece of his world and didn't need to lose another. Ryan knew all of this. He turned it over in his head with full clarity, the way you look at a warning sign with complete comprehension of what it means. And he kept dancing, because she had said, "Stop looking at the bride, look at me instead." And he was doing that, and doing it honestly, not as a performance or a mistake or a loss of judgment, but as a choice. Maybe the first real choice he'd made for himself in 4 years that didn't have Ethan's name attached to the justification. Claire turned slightly and looked up at him. This close, the professional distance was just a memory. This was her face, actual and unguarded, the version that existed behind the boardroom and the quarterly projections and the polished answers she gave to industry journalists. The version that had said, "I don't know tonight," about what she wanted when the running stopped. He thought she was going to say something. She opened her mouth slightly, then closed it. Then said quietly, "This was a bad idea." "Probably," he agreed. His voice came out steady, which surprised him. "I don't—" She stopped. "I didn't plan this. I know. I need you to know that I would never at work, I would never. Claire." He said her name the way you say it when you need someone to stop explaining themselves and just be where they are. She stopped. He looked at her. "I know," he said. "I know who you are. I've worked with you for 2.5 years. I know who you are." She held his gaze. Something in her steadied. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. The song continued. They continued with it. Around them, the floor was full of people doing the same small, significant thing. Choosing in this moment to hold on to something warm and real and uncertain. Because certainty was a lie. The daytime told, and here in the honest dark of a wedding reception, people told the truth with their bodies when words were too much trouble. Danny appeared at the edge of Ryan's vision. Ryan caught it in his peripheral awareness. His friend standing at the edge of the floor with a drink and an expression that was half joy and half the specific knowing look of a man watching a moment he had quietly, meticulously engineered. Ryan looked at him directly. Danny raised his glass, turned away. Ryan almost laughed. He didn't. Claire's head tilted slightly, almost imperceptibly, as though she were listening to something underneath the music. Her hand tightened fractionally in his, not dramatically, not with any declaration in it. Just the way your grip shifts when you're holding something you're not quite ready to let go of. Ryan felt it. He didn't say anything about it. He thought about Ethan home with Mrs. Paulson, probably asleep by now in the way kids sleep when they've decided to stop resisting it, sudden and complete like a switch. He thought about the morning when he'd go home and the apartment would be quiet, and then slowly, not quiet, and Ethan would ask him how the wedding was, in the blunt, incurious way he asked things when he was actually curious, and Ryan would say, "Good and mean complicated," and life would resume its careful, constructed shape. He thought, this is a moment, just this, just right now, and for the first time in 4 years, that was enough. The song ended, the way songs always ended, a little sooner than you were ready for, because that was what songs did, what everything did. The music resolved. The floor began to thin. Claire stepped back, and the small distance that opened between them was immediate and physical, in a way that Ryan felt in the center of his chest. She looked at him. He looked at her. Her composure was back mostly. There was a precision in her expression, the professional architecture reassembling itself with the quiet efficiency of someone who had been doing it for years. But it wasn't complete. There was still something there underneath the door, not quite fully closed. "Thank you for the dance," she said. Even. Correct. A sentence that worked in any context. "Thank you for asking," he said. She nodded once. She started to turn toward the edge of the floor. "Claire." She turned back. He didn't know what he'd been going to say. He stood there for half a second, holding the unsaid thing, and then said the only honest version of it he could put words to. Whatever this was tonight. He stopped, tried again. I'm glad I came. She looked at him for a long moment, and then something crossed her face that was quiet and real and completely unguarded. Not a smile exactly, but the thing that lived just behind a smile. The thing that a smile was pointing toward. So am I, she said. She walked off the floor. Ryan stood there another moment. The band had started something up-tempo. The crowd reshuffled around him. Somewhere Danny was laughing again. That carrying laugh of his that Ryan had been hearing since he was 20 years old. The laugh that meant everything was fine. That the night was still good. That the world had not in fact ended. Ryan pressed his hand flat against his chest, once briefly, privately the gesture of a man checking to make sure something was still in his pocket, still intact, still his. It was. He went to find a drink. Ryan got home at 11:47. He knew the exact time because he checked his watch in the elevator, the old reflex of a man who had made a promise and kept it like a contract before midnight, always before midnight, and 11:47 was enough margin that he could breathe. He unlocked the apartment door quietly because Ethan was almost certainly asleep, and there was no reason to change that, and stepped inside. Mrs. Paulson had left the kitchen light on, and a note on the counter in her precise teacher's handwriting, pizza in the fridge. Ethan was asleep by 9:15. He said to tell you the wedding better have been worth it. Ryan read it twice, smiled at nothing, and put the note in the small drawer by the stove where he kept things he didn't want to throw away. He stood in the kitchen in his dress shirt and loosened tie and ate a cold slice of pizza over the sink. It was quiet. It was always quiet at this hour. The particular deep quiet of an apartment where a child was sleeping a different quality than the quiet of an empty house fuller. Somehow the silence shaped around a small presence, rather than just hollow. He looked at the tie. Burgundy. He took it off and folded it over the back of a chair. He was tired, but not the tired that led to sleep. His mind was doing the thing it did when something significant had happened, running it back, sorting it, trying to figure out what to put where. The problem was that what had happened tonight didn't fit into any existing category. He didn't have a folder for it. 4 years of careful filing and nothing in the system covered, danced with your CEO at your best friend's wedding, while something shifted so quietly and completely that you didn't realize how far you'd moved until you were already there. He went to check on Ethan. His son was asleep on his side, one arm thrown over the edge of the mattress. The comforter kicked to the foot of the bed, the way it always was by 10 o'clock, regardless of how carefully Ryan tucked it in. Ryan pulled it back up, the same gesture he'd been making for 11 years, the one that required no thought whatsoever, the one that lived in muscle memory alongside breathing and driving and knowing exactly how many steps it was from the front door to the kitchen. He stood in the doorway for a moment, just looked. Then he went to bed and lay in the dark for a long time before sleep decided to show up. Monday arrived with the particular efficiency of Mondays, no ceremony, no warning, just suddenly present and requiring things. Ryan was at his desk by 8:30. He answered 3 emails before 9. He reviewed a vendor proposal before 10. He said good morning to Diane, who told him his 9:45 had been moved to 10:30, and he said thank you and meant it because 10:30 was better, and Diane always knew when 10:30 was better. He did not go to the 14th floor where Claire's office was for any reason. He was not avoiding it. He was simply not going there because he had no operational need to be there, and Ryan Walker's movements through the building on Wacker Drive were determined by operational need. That was how it worked. That was how it had always worked. He ate lunch at his desk. He called a vendor in Dallas at 2. He signed 3 reports, reviewed a budget draft, and sent a detailed follow-up email to the infrastructure team about a timeline that had been slipping for 6 weeks. At 4:15, his phone rang. Extension 1401. Claire's office. He looked at it for one ring before picking it up. "Walker," he said, automatic, office voice. "It's Linda, Claire's executive assistant, of course. Ms. Monroe would like to see you at your earliest convenience. She said today if possible." Ryan's hand was completely steady on the receiver. "I can be up in 20 minutes. "Perfect. I'll let her know." He put the phone down. He straightened the papers on his desk. He was not, he told himself with the flat rationality of a man who had been managing his own internal landscape for 4 years, nervous. This was a professional meeting. Claire ran professional meetings. That was the entirety of what this was. He went up at 4:35. Claire's office had floor-to-ceiling windows on the north side that looked out over the river, and beyond it, the grid of Chicago streets running straight to the horizon. Ryan had been in this office 12 times in 2.5 years. He had counted without meaning to, the way you count things when you're trying to maintain a precise understanding of their weight. 12 meetings, all operational, all cleanly bounded by agenda and outcome. He knocked on the open door. Claire was at her desk reading something on her monitor with the focused attention of someone who was finishing a thought rather than waiting to be interrupted. She held up one finger without looking at him 1 minute, and Ryan stood in the doorway and waited. She finished whatever she was reading. She turned. "Ryan, sit down." He sat. The chair across from her desk, the one he always sat in, 12 times. She looked at him with her work expression composed direct, the expression that gave away nothing except intelligence. And for a moment, Ryan wondered if he'd been wrong. If he'd built the whole Saturday night in his head into something it wasn't. And here was the real Claire Monroe, the one who ran 400 people and renegotiated contracts and never let the personal enter the room when the door said, "Meridian Technologies." "I wanted to speak with you before you heard it from someone else," she said. He held still. "Heard what?" "There's talk." She said it without inflection. Not an apology, not a performance of discomfort. A fact delivered as facts were delivered. "A few people saw us dancing on Saturday. By this morning it was on 2 separate email threads that I'm aware of, and probably more that I'm not." She paused. "In my experience, these things tend to move faster than anyone expects." Ryan said nothing for a moment. He sat with it. Then, "What kind of talk?" "The predictable kind." Her voice was even. "That the dynamic between us has changed. That there are implications for your position. One version suggests you were pursuing me, which..." The corner of her mouth moved barely. "Is not what happened." "No," he said, "it isn't. The other version suggests I was pursuing you, which is closer to accurate but significantly more complicated given the structure of this organization." She folded her hands on the desk, not nervously, but in the deliberate way of someone organizing their thoughts into physical space. "I want to be direct with you about where I stand." "Please." She looked at him steadily. "Saturday night was real," she said. "I'm not going to sit here and tell you it wasn't because that would be dishonest, and I don't do dishonest." A pause. "But I am your employer, and that structure exists for good reasons. What happened at the wedding cannot have any effect on your professional standing here, not positively, not negatively, not in any direction." "I agree," Ryan said. She looked at him like she'd expected argument and was mildly recalibrating its absence. "You agree?" "You run a company," he said. "I have a job. I have a son whose stability depends on me having that job. The last thing I want is any ambiguity about whether my position here is based on my work." He held her gaze. "Which it is. You said so yourself in my last review." "It is," she confirmed, without question. "Then we're on the same page." She held his gaze for a moment longer. Something moved in her expression briefly underneath the professional architecture and then was contained again. "The gossip will run its course," she said. "These things always do. I'd ask that you don't address it directly with colleagues, not denial, not confirmation. Just let it move through." "Understood." If anyone approaches you in a way that feels inappropriate, if there's pressure or insinuation about your standing, you come to me directly." "I will." She nodded once. She picked up her pen. The meeting was apparently moving toward conclusion. Ryan stayed seated. "Claire." She looked up. He had not planned what he was about to say. He had, in fact, spent the better part of the last 2 days carefully not thinking about what he might say to her the next time they were in the same room. But here, it was the moment, and the thing that wanted to be said was sitting right at the surface, and he was tired of filing things away. "I'm not sorry," he said. "About Saturday. I want to be clear about that." The pen stayed still in her hand. She looked at him. "I understand the complications," he said. "I understand the professional reality of this. I've thought about it clearly." He kept his voice level, not cold, not charged, just honest. "But I want you to know that I'm not sitting across from you trying to walk it back or pretend it didn't happen, because it happened and it mattered." He paused. "I think you know that." She held his gaze for what felt like a long time, and was probably 5 seconds. Then she said quietly, "I know that." "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. He stood up. He picked up the folder he'd brought up for no particular operational reason, a prop he acknowledged to himself, and a transparent one. He walked to the door. "Ryan." He turned. She was still at her desk, pen in hand, the expression on her face, something he was learning to read, the one that appeared when she had decided to be honest at the cost of composure. "For what it's worth," she said, "I don't regret it either." He held that, placed it carefully where it needed to go. "Good," he said. He walked back to the elevators. He pressed the button for the 11th floor and wrote it down in silence, and when he got back to his desk, he sat down and looked at his computer screen for a moment before doing anything else. His jaw was doing the thing Ethan said it did. He was aware of it. He let it. The talk ran through Meridian the way talk always did, not in a straight line, but in a widening ring, each telling of it slightly different from the last, the way stories warped as they traveled. By Tuesday, Ryan had received 3 separate conversational overtures from colleagues who were attempting with varying degrees of subtlety to determine what was true. Diane, who had been with Meridian long enough to have survived 3 different CEOs and had a finely calibrated understanding of the organization's social ecology, said nothing directly to Ryan. She simply placed a cup of coffee on his desk, Tuesday morning, that he hadn't asked for, and said, "You might want to close your door this afternoon." He looked at her. "Why?" "Mark Ellison is going table to table," she said. "He's been talking to people from the marketing floor." Ryan knew Mark Ellison. Mark Ellison was a senior account manager who had been passed over for a team lead position 8 months ago, a decision that had gone through Ryan's department before being finalized by Claire, and who had, in Ryan's professional assessment, never fully metabolized it. "What's he saying?" Diane set down her pen. "He's implying that the reason you weren't included in the Henderson account restructuring last quarter is because Ms. Monroe wanted to keep your profile low while things were," she chose her word, "developing." Ryan looked at the wall, then back at Diane. "That's not what happened. Henderson was restructured by Claire's directive to the VP level and above. I wasn't in the scope." "I know that," Diane said. "I also know Mark Ellison knows that." She picked her pen back up. "But knowing a thing and saying a thing are 2 different operations." "Close my door at 2, Ryan said. "Already on your calendar," she said, and returned to her work. He closed the door at 2. He sat behind it and did his actual job, moved through reports, took calls, resolved a timeline issue with the infrastructure team that had been accumulating for 3 weeks, and let the noise run its circuit somewhere outside in the building. He'd done harder things than this. He'd managed Ethan's first week at a new school after the divorce, which had involved a level of emotional triage that made office politics look like a soft entry-level challenge. At 5:15, he was packing up when his phone buzzed. Not the desk phone. His cell. A text from a number he had not saved as a contact but recognized immediately because he had looked at it once on the department directory and retained it with the involuntary precision of a mind that stored certain things without asking permission. The Henderson thing is not your problem to manage. I've handled it. CM. He read it twice. He typed back, understood. Thank you. He looked at those two words for a moment, then deleted thank you and replaced it with nothing and hit send. The response came back in 40 seconds. How's Ethan? Ryan sat down on the edge of his desk, looked at those two words, felt the specific, quiet disorientation of a question that existed entirely outside the professional context and had arrived on a Tuesday evening at 5:17 from Claire Monroe's personal cell number and was asking about his kid. He typed, good. He asked if the wedding was worth it. He hit send before he could think about it too hard. Her response took longer this time. A full 2 minutes. He was standing up again, putting on his jacket when the phone buzzed. What did you tell him? He stopped. He looked at the question. He thought about how to answer it honestly, about what he'd actually told Ethan that Sunday morning when his son had appeared in the kitchen at 7:45 and asked, so how was it, in the studied casual voice he used when he cared about the answer. Ryan had looked at him over the coffee maker and said, good. Different than I expected, but good. And Ethan had said different how, and Ryan had said in ways I'm still figuring out. And Ethan had looked at him with those eyes of his that missed very little, and said okay, in a tone that contained an entire conversation neither of them was quite ready for. Ryan typed, I told him it was worth it. He put the phone in his pocket and walked out to the elevator. Wednesday and Thursday passed in the particular way of days that are uneventful on the surface and significant underneath. Ryan did his work. He ate lunch with James from accounting, who said something dryly funny about the Q2 projections that Ryan genuinely laughed at. He picked up Ethan, and they made dinner together, pasta, which was the one thing they could reliably produce without incident, and Ethan talked about a science project, and Ryan listened and asked questions and was genuinely home. Actually home, present in the way that he'd been working toward since Ethan was 7 years old, and a therapist had said to Ryan very gently that children didn't need perfect parents, they needed visible ones. Thursday night after Ethan was in bed, Ryan sat on the couch and called Danny. Walker. Danny picked up fast, which meant he'd been expecting the call, or hoping for it. You set us up, Ryan said. A pause. I put two people I respect at the same table. Danny. Ryan. You knew what you were doing. A longer pause. Then, with the candor of someone who had been waiting to stop pretending, Sophie thought and I agreed that you had been alone long enough. A beat. And Claire had been, she doesn't say it. You know, she's Claire. She doesn't say things like I'm lonely or I've been alone long enough. But Sophie knows her. And Sophie said, what did Sophie say? That Claire had mentioned you more than once. Not in a, it wasn't inappropriate, nothing like that. Just your name came up, more than once. When she talked about Meridian, when she talked about the people she respected. Another pause. Sophie said she'd never heard Claire talk about a colleague the way she talked about you. Not romantically. Just like you were a real person to her. Like you mattered. Ryan was quiet. I'm sorry if I overstepped, Danny said, and he actually meant it. But Ryan, I've watched you hold yourself together for 4 years, like you're afraid that if you let anything in the whole structure falls. And I get it. I do. But you're not a house. You don't fall apart because you let something in. A pause. You're my best friend. I wanted you to have a good night. Ryan looked at the ceiling. The same ceiling. Still the same. It was a good night, he said. Yeah. And nothing. And it was a good night, Danny. Leave it there for now. A beat. Okay. A beat. Does she know about the guitar? Ryan almost laughed. Why would she know about the guitar? I'm just look if you told her about the guitar that's significant. You haven't told anyone about the guitar in years. Good night, Danny. I'm just saying. Good night. He hung up. He sat in the quiet apartment and listened to the building settle around him, the distant sound of a television 2 units over the particular creak of the floor in the hallway outside, the sound of Chicago going about its Thursday night business beyond the windows. He thought about what Danny had said. You're not a house. He sat with that and turned it over and found somewhat to his surprise that it didn't land the way it would have a week ago. A week ago, it would have been advice he appreciated but couldn't quite use advice for a person he understood conceptually but couldn't locate in himself. Tonight, it felt like something that had become true in the last 4 days without his active participation. Something had changed at that wedding. He'd been trying to identify it with precision what it was where it lived, what it meant for the things he'd built. But precision wasn't the right tool for it. It wasn't a decision or a policy change or a restructured org chart. It was quieter than that, more interior. It was the feeling of having been in a room with someone who saw the real version of you, not the operational version, not the performance, but the one who sold the guitar and missed it sometimes, and had a kid with untamable hair, and was tired of running on maintenance, and having that person look at the real version and not look away. That was it. That was the thing. He picked up his phone, looked at the last text exchange. I told him it was worth it. And Claire's reply, 2 words. Good. Just that. Nothing else. He put the phone face down on the cushion beside him. He needed to think about this carefully. He knew that. He needed to think about Ethan, about the structure, about the genuine and legitimate reasons why the line between his personal life and his professional one existed and mattered. He needed to think about the meridian reality, the talks Mark Ellison's noise, the way rumors move through an organization like a slow flood. His phone buzzed. He picked it up. Claire. Not a text this time. A call. He looked at the screen for 1 full ring. Then he answered. Hey, he said. Not Walker, not his office voice. Just, hey, the way you answered your phone when the person calling was someone you danced with in the middle of a crowded room because you'd stopped pretending you didn't want to. A pause on the other end. Brief. Then her voice, and it was not her office voice either. It was the wedding voice, the table 4 voice, the one that had said, I don't know about what she wanted when the running stopped. I know this is outside the... She stopped, tried again. I wanted to ask you something. Okay, he said. There's a restaurant on Fulton Market, she said. Small, good food, quiet enough to talk. Another pause. Saturday, if Ethan has someone. Ryan was quiet for a moment. He was aware of his own heartbeat with a clarity that was mildly inconvenient. Not as colleagues, she said. Her voice was steady, but he could hear the cost of the steadiness. He knew what steady cost better than most. I want to be specific about that. Not as colleagues. He looked at the far wall of his apartment. He thought about Ethan. He thought about Mrs. Paulson, who had already said, whenever you need me, just ask. He thought about 4 years of making every decision in a direction away from uncertainty and what that had cost and whether the cost had always been worth it. I'll call Mrs. Paulson, he said. The pause on her end was shorter this time. Okay, she said. He heard the word land differently than the professional version, the one she used to close agenda items. This was a different okay. The kind that meant I was hoping you'd say that and didn't have a formal equivalent. Saturday, he said. Saturday, she confirmed. A beat of silence that was comfortable in the way that silences become comfortable when the hard thing has been said and landed where it needed to land, and neither person needs to fill the space with noise. Good night, Ryan, she said. Good night, Claire. He put the phone down on the cushion. He looked at the ceiling. His jaw was doing that thing again. He didn't do anything about it. Mrs. Paulson said yes before Ryan finished the sentence. He called her Friday morning from the kitchen, while Ethan was still asleep, speaking low into the phone, and she said, "Of course, bring him over at 6. I made cookies yesterday." And Ryan said thank you, and she said, "Ryan," in the particular tone she used when she wanted him to pay attention to something beyond the practical. "I'm glad you're going out." He didn't ask her what she meant by that. He knew what she meant by that. He told Ethan at breakfast. Ethan was working through a bowl of cereal, with the methodical focus of someone fueling for a day of important activity, and Ryan sat across from him and said, "Saturday night you're going to Mrs. Paulson's. I have plans." Ethan looked up. "Plans? Dinner? With who?" Ryan held his son's gaze. He'd thought about how to handle this, whether to be vague, whether to deflect, whether to deploy one of the dozen small parental evasions he had in his toolkit. He looked at Ethan's face, at those eyes that filed things away, and came back to them later with quiet accuracy, and decided that the deflection would cost more than the truth. "Someone from work," he said. "Her name is Claire." Ethan chewed his cereal. Processed. "Is this like a date?" "It's dinner." "That's not what I asked." Ryan looked at his son, 11 years old, almost 12. "Yeah," he said. "It might be like a date." Ethan looked at his cereal, then back at Ryan. Ryan could see him working through it, the small internal machinery of a kid who had been the whole center of his father's life for 4 years and was now receiving a piece of information that required recalibration. Ryan sat with it. Let the moment breathe, didn't rush to fill it with reassurance that hadn't been asked for. Finally, Ethan said, "Is she nice?" "She's..." Ryan considered. "She's honest. She's direct. She works hard." A pause. "She asked about you." Something in Ethan shifted slightly. Not dramatically, this was not a dramatic kid. He was his father's son in that way. Just slightly. "What did she ask?" "She knew you told me to wear the burgundy tie." Ryan said it simply. "She thought you had good taste." Ethan looked at the table, then at Ryan. His expression was doing the 11-year-old version of the thing Ryan's face did when he was processing something important and keeping it contained. "Okay," he said finally. "Okay. Yeah." He went back to his cereal. "Okay." It was the same word Claire had said on the phone 2 nights ago, and it had the same quality that single syllable doing the work of a longer sentence carrying more than its size would suggest. Ryan sat with it and felt something settle in his chest that had been quietly unsettled for days. "The burgundy tie again," Ethan said without looking up. Ryan almost smiled. He let it happen this time all the way. "Probably," he said. The restaurant was on Fulton Market exactly as Claire had said. Small no sign above the door that announced itself aggressively, the kind of place that existed for people who already knew where it was. Ryan arrived at 7. Claire was already there, which didn't surprise him. She was someone who arrived first. He suspected she had been arriving first her whole life. She was at a corner table. Not in the green dress, something different tonight, quieter in color. A deep burgundy that made Ryan look at his own tie with a specific private amusement. She saw him register it, and the corner of her mouth moved. "Coincidence," she said as he sat down. "Absolutely," he agreed. The server appeared. They ordered drinks, wine for him, sparkling water for her again, which he noted without comment, but filed as another small real piece of information about who she was outside the office. When the server left, the silence settled between them, and it was not the comfortable silence of table 4, nor the charged silence of the dance floor. It was something new, the silence of 2 people who had decided to show up, and were now looking at each other in a context stripped of the wedding's social scaffolding and the office's professional armor. Just a table. Just 2 people. "This feels different," he said. "It is different," she said. "That's the point." He looked at her. "Are you nervous?" She looked back with the expression of someone who was about to deny something and then thought better of it. "Slightly," she said. "You, more than slightly." She laughed, the real one, the unguarded one. It landed the same way it had at the wedding, that quality of something breaking through. "Good," she said. "That means neither of us is performing." "I don't know how to perform with you," he said. "I've tried, in meetings. You see through it immediately." "I see through most things immediately," she said. "It's useful professionally and inconvenient personally." "How so?" "Because it means I can't pretend I don't know what I know." She held her water glass. "About people, about situations." A pause. "About what I want." Ryan held that. "And what do you want?" he asked. He said it the way she asked questions, directly, without the polite, circuitous approach, because they had established somewhere between Table 4 and this corner table on Fulton Market that they were the kind of people who asked the thing. She looked at him steadily. "Something real," she said. "Something that isn't managed or optimized or structured within an inch of its life." She paused. "I've been managing and optimizing for 15 years. I'm very good at it. I'm also—" She stopped. The word she was looking for was one she didn't reach for easily. "Tired," she said finally, "of things that don't surprise me." "I'm not exciting," Ryan said. "I want to be honest about that. I have a routine. I have an 11-year-old. Saturday nights are usually takeout, and a movie that Ethan picks, and I fall asleep before it ends." "I know," she said. "That doesn't sound like something to apologize for." "I'm not apologizing. I'm describing." "Then I'm listening," she said. "Because what you're describing sounds like a life, an actual life." She turned her glass. "I have a career. I have a very well-run career. I am less certain I have a life." He looked at her. The restaurant was quiet around them, the particular Tuesday night quiet of a serious place where people came to talk rather than to be seen. Someone across the room said something low, and someone else laughed softly. The ambient noise was just enough to make their corner feel private. "You have one," he said. "You just haven't been paying attention to it." She looked at him with the expression of someone who had been told an accurate thing and was deciding how to hold it. "Is that what you did?" she asked. "Before," she paused. "Before the wedding. Were you not paying attention to yours?" "I was paying attention to the version of it I thought was safe," he said. "Ethan work routine repeat." He looked at the table. "I told myself that was enough. That wanting more was irresponsible somehow, like I'd used up my allocation." "Of what?" "Of wanting things for myself." He said it flatly, without self-pity, the way you say a true thing, when you finally said it enough times in your own head that it's lost the ability to embarrass you. Ethan was 4 when his mother and I divorced. For a long time, wanting anything outside of what was good for him felt selfish, like a bad allocation of energy. Claire was quiet for a moment. "He's not 4 anymore," she said. "No." He looked up. "He's not." She held his gaze. "Ryan. He has a father who checks the stove before he leaves, who is home at 6 every evening, who calls Mrs. Paulson and keeps his promises, and told his son the truth about having dinner with someone." A beat. "You've been doing the job. You've been doing it well." She paused. "It's okay to also be a person." It was almost exactly what she'd said at the wedding. You stop being a person, you become a function. But tonight it landed differently. Tonight it wasn't an observation from across a table at a reception. Tonight it was an offering. A direct, clear Claire Monroe offering delivered with the precision of someone who had chosen these exact words and meant all of them. Ryan looked at her for a long moment. He thought about Ethan that morning saying okay over his cereal. He thought about Mrs. Paulson saying, "I'm glad you're going out." He thought about Danny, who had placed 2 people at table 4 and called it a seating chart. "I'm working on it," he said. She nodded. And then, with the quiet confidence of someone who had decided to stop circling and land. "I'd like to be part of that," she said, "if you'll let me." The words were simple. They were the most unguarded thing she had said to him across all of it. The cocktail hour, table 4, the dance floor, the office meeting, the phone call. All of it had been leading here to this corner table, to Claire Monroe saying, "I'd like to be part of that," without any of the professional scaffolding to hide behind. Ryan took a slow breath. "There are complications," he said. "I know. Real ones. The office, the reporting structure, Mark Ellison and everyone like him." "I know," she said again, steadier. "And Ethan is not a complication. He's the priority, always." "I understand that." No hesitation. "I would never ask you to make him anything less than the priority." He looked at her. He looked for the thing that wasn't true in it, the angle, the managed version, and he didn't find it. He found Claire Monroe, who saw through things immediately, and was sitting across from him at a quiet restaurant on Fulton Market on a Saturday night, not because it was strategic or useful or professionally advantageous, but because she had walked to the edge of something and decided to say it out loud. "The complications are real," he said, "and I'm not going to pretend they aren't." He paused. "But I'm not going to use them as reasons anymore." She looked at him. "Reasons for what?" "For not showing up," he said, and heard Danny in it as he said it. Showing up was the choice. It had always been the choice, and meant it completely for the first time in 4 years, in a direction that included himself. Something crossed Claire's face, that thing behind the smile, the thing the smile was pointing toward. She looked at him, with it openly, not containing it, not managing it back into composure. She just let him see it. "Okay," she said, and that word, the third time from this particular person, in this particular context, meant something it had never meant from anyone else. They ate dinner for 2 hours. They talked about things that had nothing to do with Meridian, about the city, about music, about books they'd read, and hadn't had anyone to argue about afterward. Claire had opinions about architecture that surprised him. He told her about the guitar. She told him about a failed attempt to learn piano at 34 that had lasted 6 weeks and ended in a mutual agreement between her and the instrument that they were not compatible. He laughed genuinely at that. She watched him laugh with an expression of quiet satisfaction, like someone who had been working toward something and found it. He told her about his mother in Cincinnati, who called every Sunday in the same order. "How are you? How is Ethan? Have you eaten?" Claire told him about her father in Portland, who had retired from 30 years of teaching high school history and spent his weekends building furniture he gave away to neighbors. "He made me a bookshelf when I moved to Chicago," she said. "Shipped it. It weighed 60 pounds. Do you still have it?" "It's the only thing in my apartment I'm certain about," she said. And said it in a way that made it clear she meant more than the furniture. When the server cleared their plates and asked about dessert, they both said no at the same time, and then looked at each other, and Ryan said, "One question before we leave." And she said, "All right." And he said, "The apartment in New York, the last place that felt completely yours." He held her gaze. What made it feel that way? She looked at him. She thought about it for a real moment, not the managed pause, but the actual consideration of someone retrieving a true memory. "The light," she said. "In the morning. It came through the east window and hit the bookshelf, my father's bookshelf, and for about 20 minutes it was just mine. Everything quiet, everything still. Nobody needed anything from me." Ryan nodded. He held that image, Claire Monroe at 30-something before the CEO title, and the 400 employees and the Tribune articles standing in morning light in an apartment that was hers. "You can have that here," he said. "Chicago has mornings." She looked at him across the small table with the expression of someone who had not expected that specific gentleness from that specific direction, and didn't quite know what to do with it, and then decided to simply receive it. "I think I might," she said quietly. He got home at 10:12. He picked up Ethan from Mrs. Paulson's, who pressed a tin of cookies into his hands and said nothing except "Good night, dear," in a tone that contained a complete editorial. Ethan was in his jacket and shoes by the door. He'd been watching for Ryan, which Ethan never admitted to, but always did another thing that lived in the machinery of their life together, unannounced and constant. In the elevator, Ethan said without looking at him, "How was dinner?" "Good," Ryan said. Yeah. Ethan looked at the elevator doors. "Is she going to come over sometime for dinner or whatever?" Ryan looked at his son. The gap between the two front teeth. The hair that wouldn't cooperate. The eyes that missed nothing and said less than they saw. "Maybe," Ryan said, "when the timing is right." Ethan considered this. "She should know I'm the one who cooks the pasta," he said. "You always put in too much salt." "I've been putting in the right amount of salt for 11 years. "You've been wrong for 11 years, Ethan said with the serenity of someone stating a geological fact. Ryan looked at his son. The thing he felt in that moment was not complicated. It was the oldest, simplest thing. The thing that had been running underneath all of it, the whole architecture, the whole careful structure of the last 4 years. Love of the most specific and irreducible kind. The kind that showed up at 6 every evening, and checked the stove, and kept the promises, and never once, not even on the hardest nights, considered any other option. "I'll tell her," Ryan said. "Good," Ethan said. The elevator opened. They walked to the apartment. Ryan unlocked the door, checked the lock, double-checked the lock. Old habit always, and they went inside. 3 weeks later, Ryan was at his desk on a Tuesday morning when Linda called down from the 14th floor. He answered on the first ring. "Ms. Monroe would like to see you at your earliest convenience," Linda said. "She said it's not urgent. She said take your time." Ryan noted the last part. Take your time was not Claire Monroe's standard operational language. In 2.5 years, he had never heard her office pass along the message, "Take your time." It was a small thing, and it was a specific thing, and he understood exactly what it meant. "Tell her I'll be up in 15 minutes, he said. He took 20. Not because he was uncertain, because take your time was an instruction, and he intended to honor it, to sit at his desk for 20 minutes and feel the full weight of where things stood before he went upstairs. The work, the responsibility, the real and legitimate professional complexity of what they were navigating. Ethan at school right now, working on a science project, eating whatever they packed for lunch, going about the ordinary, irreplaceable business of being 11 years old and counting on his father to be solid. Ryan held all of it, every piece. Then he straightened his desk, picked up the folder he'd been preparing, a real one this time, an actual operational document, a proposal for a cross-department efficiency initiative he'd been developing for 2 months, and took the elevator to the 14th floor. He knocked on the open door. Claire looked up from her desk. Her expression was composed, professional, the full armor assembled and in place. But her eyes, when they found his, were the eyes from table 4, from the dance floor, from the corner restaurant on Fulton Market, the ones that didn't manage what they showed. "Ryan," she said, "sit down." He sat, the same chair. 13th time. He placed the folder on the desk between them. "I brought something to show you," he said. "An actual proposal, in case anyone walks by." She looked at the folder, then at him, and for one brief, unguarded moment before the meeting officially began, before the professional context reasserted its structure and its rules, Claire Monroe smiled. Not the almost smile, not the corner of the mouth movement. A real one, full and direct and unhidden. Then she picked up the folder, opened it, and said, "Let's hear it." And Ryan Walker, who had spent 4 years in maintenance mode, who had sold a guitar and double-checked the lock and gotten home before midnight every single time, Ryan Walker looked at the woman across the desk and began to talk, and for the first time in longer than he could precisely remember, the version of him doing the talking was the whole version. Not a function, not a system running its program. A person fully present in his own life, and finally deliberately unapologetically choosing to be there.